All right, let's dive right into this. Today's explainer is unpacking a seriously dramatic, highly controversial event that went down in the dead of night, right in the heart of India's capital. I want you to picture this. It's the middle of the night at Jantar Mantar, Delhi's historic site for protests, and suddenly a massive police operation just kicks into gear. Now, the source material we're analyzing today makes a strong argument here. They're saying this absolutely wasn't just some routine police check. Rather, it was a highly calculated crackdown on a rapidly growing student movement. So, we're going to look at the actual anatomy of this operation. We'll break down the timeline, look at the specific tactics the source claims were used by the state, and dig into the historical echoes all of this carries. Let's get into exactly what happened and, more importantly, why it matters. So the really crucial point the source makes is just how secretive and incredibly fast this all unfolded on July 18th. According to the timeline provided, at exactly 3 a.m., New Delhi District Police personnel were suddenly called in, and they were told they were doing a monsoon session drill for Parliament. But, as it turns out, that was a diversion. Once they got to the Mandir Marg police station, the true objective was finally revealed to them. They were there to clear the protesters from Jantar Mantar. And when they actually rolled up to the site, the police allegedly operated in full-blown commando mode. They literally gave the volunteers a mere 30-second window to clear out. 30 seconds. The commentary points out that this was actually the first major operation for Delhi's newly appointed police commissioner, and they describe the whole thing as a massive demonstration of sheer political will. Now, the primary target of this entire midnight operation was Sonam Wangchuk. He's a 59-year-old climate and education activist, and the source really wants us to understand the intense physical stakes here. Wangchuk was on the 21st day of a grueling hunger strike. Think about that for a second. 21 days without food. According to the breakdown, volunteers were just pushed aside as he was forcibly removed. The commentary specifically points out this detail, where the police actually brought out bed sheets to shield the whole operation from public view, relocating a guy who hadn't eaten in 3 weeks, supposedly without even presenting an ID card or a formal court order for his detention. Okay, moving on to Section 1, core demands driving protests. To really understand why the government reacted this way, the source makes it super clear that this wasn't just an arbitrary, directionless gathering. This was a laser-focused movement fighting for the future of India's youth, tackling an education crisis that resonates with students everywhere. What were they actually asking for? Well, they demanded a comprehensive reform of an education system that they felt had become entirely corrupt and outdated. More specifically, they were demanding real accountability for the highly publicized meat paper leak scandal. And their biggest political demand? The immediate resignation of Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan. The creator of the source material emphasizes that these weren't some wild, impossible demands meant to topple the entire government, It was just a highly focused plea for accountability in the education sector. And this quote right here, it perfectly captures the conviction behind their movement. Literally right before the police intervened, Wangchuk issued this very severe political warning. He said, "Governments have fallen for much less. We are talking about students' futures." The commentary argues that this specific warning is what really tipped the scales. He was pointing out that the movement was gaining serious traction, not just with students, but with Bollywood stars, political leaders, and even international media. And the source suggests that this realization is exactly what made the administration feel like the protest was slipping completely out of their control. Which brings us to Section 2, tactics used to suppress. So how exactly does a state go about dismantling a growing movement? Well, the creator argues that the Midnight Raid wasn't just an isolated event. It was actually the final step in a broader 5-step playbook deployed against the protesters. Just look at this escalation path. Step 1, digital mockery, basically a coordinated me more. Step 2, media deflection. Step 3, deployment of infiltrators. Step 4, pressured medical intervention. And finally, Step 5, the midnight police crackdown. Let's break down exactly how the source claims these earlier tactics were weaponized against the students before the police ever showed up. So regarding those first couple of steps, the commentary explains that the movement was initially targeted entirely online. We're talking memes used to actively mock a 59-year-old man on a hunger strike. But when the physical protest got too big and just couldn't be ignored anymore, sympathetic media outlets were allegedly deployed. Instead of reporting on the actual NEET scandal, the source claims reporters basically scoured the protest site looking for anything controversial. By obsessing over Urdu slogans like Inqilab Zindabad, the media attempted to completely deflect attention away from the education crisis. The goal, according to the source, was to falsely frame the protest as a religious or anti-national issue. They claim this is a pretty standard tactic used to divide public opinion. Now, when that media narrative didn't stop the crowds from showing up, the tactics seriously escalated. The source asserts that antisocial elements were essentially sent into the crowd to spark fights. The idea was to create chaos and give the police a valid excuse to step in. But when that failed, the government allegedly pivoted to a softer approach, sending in doctors to strongly urge Wangchuk to go to the hospital. But Wangchuk absolutely refused this medical intervention. He stood his ground and firmly stated that his hunger strike was a self-chosen path of protest. He said it was a choice, not a disease or a disorder that needed to be cured. And here is where we see a massive contrast between the official narrative and the source's account of events on the ground. You see, the Delhi police justified their actions on social media by stating they were simply adhering to a high court order that required doctors to monitor Wangchuk's health. However, the source sharply critiques this. They point out that, hey, the court ordered monitoring, right? Not an involuntary midnight removal to Safdarjung Hospital. And even more concerning, the commentary notes that Wangchuk's wife was completely denied access to his digital medical reports, and she wasn't even allowed to meet him with a mobile phone. The source suggests this means the government was deeply afraid of him managing to release a video message to the public. All right, let's jump into Section 3, Echoes of Past Movements. To truly grasp the weight of this event, the source argues we really need to look back at history, and they highlight this incredibly stark juxtaposition. Back in 1998, public outrage over rising onion prices was so intense, so furious, that it literally led to the fall of the central government, along with state governments in Delhi and Rajasthan. Now, contrast that with 2024. We have a massive education crisis, marred by systemic failures and, tragically, over 20 student suicides. Yet, according to the source, this modern crisis has been met with almost zero political accountability. The creator openly poses a really heavy question here. In today's India, is the price of onions genuinely considered a more emotive and politically dangerous issue than the actual lives and futures of young students? And honestly, the historical irony gets even deeper when we look at 2011. The source vividly brings up the Anna Hazare anti-corruption hunger strike. During that specific time, Narendra Modi, who was the chief minister of Gujarat back then, he heavily praised Hazare. He lifted him up as this incredible beacon of hope for the nation's youth. Fast forward to 2024, and Sonam Wangchuk's highly similar Gandhian-style hunger strike is met with absolute silence from now Prime Minister Modi, a silence that ultimately culminated in this involuntary police crackdown. The source uses this comparison to really shine a spotlight on a perceived hypocrisy in how the scent is treated, totally depending on who happens to be in power at the time. Ultimately, the source pieces all these historical threads together to make a much broader political critique. The creator argues that the current ruling alliance is finding itself in a deeply, deeply vulnerable position right now. In fact, they say it strongly mirrors the 2011-2012 era of the previous UPA government. Think about it. They're facing daily allegations of corruption, widespread economic and policy stagnation, and rising inflation that's seriously straining the public's wallets. Because of all this, the source suggests that the government's highly aggressive, heavy-handed response at Jantar Mantar is actually a symptom of an administration that is absolutely desperate to silence an awakening public consciousness. Okay, so that leads us to Section 4. What happens next? After this massive midnight operation, you have to ask, did the state's tactics actually work? If the government thought that just removing Wangchuk would instantly kill the protest dead in its tracks, well, the source indicates they severely miscalculated. Because while activists like Abhijit Dipke were visibly devastated, literally shedding tears on stage, Dipke turned right around and immediately announced that he was taking over the hunger strike himself. Furthermore, the massive protest march to Parliament, which was planned for July 20th, that remains completely on track, no delays. On top of that, the protesters are gearing up for a major digital battle. They're preparing to aggressively counter all the online misinformation that's trying to brand their fight for education as anti-national. The dissent hasn't disappeared. It seems it has only adapted. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought presented by our source material today. We've gone through the 3 a.m. timeline, we've broken down the state's 5-step tactics, and we've looked at the undeniable historical ironies at play here. Yes, the government may have successfully physically cleared Jantar Mantar under the cover of darkness, but those underlying issues regarding a failing education system, those remain completely unresolved. So, the ultimate question we have to ask is this. Will this midnight crackdown successfully silence the student movement for good, or will history look back at this exact moment as the catalyst, the ultimate turning point that finally forced democratic accountability? It's a massive question, and it's one that will undoubtedly be answered in the days and weeks to come. Thanks for joining me to unpack this explainer today. Keep questioning and keep learning.